Hey there, my name is Tim Brooks. I am the founder of the Endangered Alphabets Project and the principal creator of our game Ulus, Legends of the Nomads. I'm going to help you set the game up and walk you through how to play it. I'm also going to, every so often, tell you a little bit about the amazing Mongolian culture, which was, after all, one of our main reasons for wanting to make this game. Okay, here we go. So the first thing you're going to want to do is to lay out the game mat. There are actually two different game mats. There is a fabric game mat, which comes with the basic edition of Ulus, and there is a felt game mat that comes with the deluxe edition. Felt is really important to this game because felt is a vital traditional fabric used for all sorts of purposes in Mongol culture, such as clothes and shoes, and even their yurts, which they call ger, are made out of felt. Whichever mat you're using, you'll notice there are 8 circles around the edge and a large circle in the middle. And you'll also notice that these circles contain inscriptions or writing that you can't read. And that doesn't matter, I'm going to explain what they're all about right now. The first part of the game, Ulus, involves a journey around the Mongol lands. And the game mat is, in effect, a kind of a map of the Mongol lands. But those characters in the circles don't represent place names, they represent seasons, because each turn involves a move from one season to the next. And in that sense, the game is seasonal and nomadic, very much like Mongol culture. If you look at page 2 of the rulebook, it will show you which way up to put your game mat. And this is actually important because the circle that needs to be at the top contains the word for summer. And then as you move clockwise around the mat, it goes autumn, winter, spring, summer again. And you're going to be traveling around the mat with the seasons, season by season, until you've completed one full circuit, and then you're going to move into the center circle, which is the summer festival at Naadam. And again, there's a lot of information about Naadam in the rulebook. So the next thing you're going to do is you're going to shuffle the sacred site cards and then put one of them face up on each of those 8 circles around the edge of the game mat. This is in fact going to determine where you travel as you travel season by season. And because you've shuffled them, it also means that each game, the order in which you travel around the Mongol lands is going to be different. What you want to do, having placed those cards on their respective seasons, is to look carefully at the sacred site cards. Each sacred site card represents an actual place in the Mongol lands. Each of the cards and each of the sites has different value for different players and their gods. So it's worthwhile looking at them quite closely right away. And in particular, as you play the game, it's worthwhile looking ahead to see which site is coming up next as you move around the game mat. The reason for this is that at each site, one particular champion is going to gain strength. Also, certain of the asset cards are going to give extra strength to the player who is holding them. So part of the strategy then is to look ahead and plan your decisions and your strategies with a view to where you're going to be going next, where you're going to be going after that, and what cards you want to be holding in your hand and how you want to play them. For the time being, we don't need to get into that strategy. It's just a good habit when you're putting the sacred site cards out to look at them carefully and to note which is where and what values they have to whom. Some of the sacred site cards involve danger. One, for example, has 2 monsters, which we'll see when we get there. Okay, having placed the sacred site cards around the mat on those 8 circles, there isn't one for the center circle, by the way, you then want to make sure that every player has 4 shagai. So the shagai are sheep's ankle bones. And these are traditionally used throughout Asia for divination and also for a variety of children's games. One of the things you're going to want to do straight away is look really closely at your shagai and make sure you can identify which face is which. So if you look at page 3 of the rule book, it'll show you a photograph of the shagai and which upward facing shape is which. But at the beginning in particular, it takes a little bit of getting used to. So the next thing is to shuffle the god cards. The god cards are going to be really important throughout the game. And you're also going to want to keep it to yourself which god card you have. So that means whoever is shuffling the cards shuffles them face down and fans them out and holds them out face down. If there are more god cards than there are players, that doesn't matter. That's fine. So each of the players takes a god card and then privately looks at it and then puts it face down in front of them next to the mat. At this point, it would be a really good idea to look at pages 4 and 5 of the rulebook. Each god has a different ambition for the future of the Mongol lands, a different Ulus, as we say. The god card that you have taken is going to dictate what you are going to do for the rest of the game, and in particular in terms of what asset cards you're trying to collect. You are collecting asset cards that in fact will support the future of the Mongol lands, the Mongol people, and the Mongol soul. The god card for Tengri, for example, says that his Ulus is a Mongol land or a Mongolia dedicated to manufacture, trade, and commerce. And then right underneath that assets, it says camel, arag, eagle, map, fortress. So those are the asset cards that you are going to be trying to find and keep. They will have value for you, which will add up, and it will determine, in fact, whether you've won the game. The next feature of the god card, which is really worth paying attention to before the game begins, is the god's ability. Each god has a particular ability that can only be used once during the course of the game. So it's worth knowing what that ability is and thinking about under what circumstances you might need to use it. The only exception is Lobsagoi, who has a very particular ability, and that is worth looking up in the rulebook. The next stage involves choosing a champion card. The dealer lays out all the champion cards face up. So the difference between the god card and the champion card then is that the god card is a secret to the player, but everybody is going to know which champion is representing the player in the game. Each player then chooses one of these champion cards, figure from Mongol history or mythology, and then places it face up in front of them by the game mat next to the god card. On the champion card, you'll see a little bit about their place in Mongol history or mythology, and there's a lot more about this in the game book, by the way. And then the champion's ability. Unlike the god's ability, which is going to be used during the first part of the game when players are traveling around the Mongol lands. The champion's ability can only be used when all of the champions have arrived at the summer festival of Naadam. So next, somebody who's acting as dealer shuffles the asset cards and deals each player 3 face down. You don't want other players to know what your asset cards are. The deck of asset cards is then placed next to the game mat face down. Then the monster cards are shuffled and placed face down in a pile beside the game mat, except that you don't get dealt any monsters. Also beside the game mat, face up, the Eternal Blue Sky cards are placed in a very short pile. Every player is given a scorecard and a colorful little paperclip, which is going to indicate what your champion's strength is at any given time, because this is going to go up and down constantly as the game goes on. The last thing you're going to do before the game starts is you're going to look at your asset cards and you're going to decide which one seems least valuable to you, but also potentially least valuable to somebody else. Because what you're going to do, as in the game of hearts, is you're going to pass one asset card to the player on your left. So obviously at this point, you want to have a pretty good idea of who your god is, what asset cards are going to be valuable to your god, and you're also going to be trying to start working out which god is driving the play of the other players, because clearly you don't want to give them asset cards that are going to be useful to them. All of this is explained in greater detail between pages 4 and 7 of the rulebook. Okay, you are now ready to play. There should be at least one spare shagai. Take that shagai and place it camel side up on the top circle, the first of the sacred sites, to show you where the camel caravan of champions is at the moment. That camel shagai is going to be moved step by step, season by season, around the game mat until you have visited all of the sacred sites. So it's just to remind you where everybody is. The caravan of champions is about to get going. You're about to visit this first sacred site. Let's say, for example, it is the Orkhon Valley. And the Orkhon Valley card says Jangar gains 5 strength. If one of the players has Jangar as their champion, then they announce this. They say, Jangar, I'm gaining 5 strength, and they move their colorful little paperclip on their scorecard to show that they've increased their strength by 5. You also want to look at the bottom line on the sacred site card, because at most sacred sites, if you're holding particular asset cards, you gain strength as well. So if, for example, you're at Ureg Lake, then if you're holding wolf, snow leopard, or bow, then you announce that, and in each case you gain 1 strength. And now we come to the main point of the journey around the Mongol lands, which is that at each sacred site, there is an asset, in some cases more than one, but it is guarded by a monster. This is kind of like the dragon sitting on the pile of gold. You don't know what asset card this particular monster is guarding, and so you have to make a determination about your strength and the likely value of the asset card to you, and then you make the determination whether you are going to fight that monster or not. And of course, the other difficult thing is that you don't know what the monster is. The monster pile is face down, and until you've made that determination whether you're going to fight or not, you have to do that blind. so the monster card has not yet been turned over. So you have a choice. You go around the circle of players, starting with the oldest in the Mongolian tradition, and then going clockwise. And each player in turn is going to make that decision to fight or not to fight. You can make a calculation as to how much strength you have, whether you think you have enough strength to fight, and you can say, I am going to sit this one out. I am going to rest and recover. And what that means is that you gain 5 strength points, but you can't take part in any combat at that site. You can't gain any asset cards. You are just sort of sitting watching. Obviously, this is a useful strategy if your strength is down to very, very low at this point. If, on the other hand, you decide that you want to take a risk, you want to face a monster in the hope of winning whatever asset card that monster is guarding, then you make that announcement. You say, I am going to fight. When that happens, the player who's making that decision turns over the top card of the monster deck. And at this point, it's probably worth noting that at Ureg Lake, there are 2 monsters. And so you turn both of the top 2 cards over to see who it is you'll be facing. And at the Sacred Yurts of the Darkads, there are no monsters and no assets. It's a place of healing and recovery and spiritual growth in general. When you turn the monster card over, what you'll see, apart from the gruesome picture of the monster itself, is the name of the monster and a little bit about its place or origin in Mongol mythology. Then a number, which might be, for example, 4x. That number indicates the strength of the monster. And the X refers to the fact that the monsters are more powerful if there are more players in the game. If there are, let's say, 3 people playing and the monster is 4x, then that means that the monster has 12 strength points. The exception is if you and the caravan are traveling around and at this point it is winter, because in winter the monsters are hungrier and more desperate, and 1 strength is added to the multiplier. If the monster on the card says 2x, but you're at a winter point in the game, then the monster's strength will be 3 times the number of players. You've reached a particular sacred site, you've decided you're going to fight, the monster card has been turned over, you're facing the monster, and again, you have some choices. You'll remember that the Shagai are traditionally used for divination. In fact, divination is a means of communicating with one's god. One of the things that you can do is to roll your 4 Shagai to ask for help and assistance from your god. As with traditional divination, the faces of the Shagai that end up upwards determine whether the god's going to help you or not. The details of this are on page 10 of the rulebook, but basically speaking, the god may decide that you are worth helping, you're a worthy champion, and may kill the monster for you, or other things may happen. In particular, the goat face is unlucky in Mongolian traditional divination, so if you roll 3 or 4 goats, a second monster appears to join forces with the first, and you're in real trouble now. What happens at this point is fairly straightforward. If your champion has more strength points than the monster has power, then your champion defeats the monster. The monster card is then placed on the monster card discard pile. You take the asset card, which is the asset card that's on top of the asset card deck, and your champion's strength is reduced by the number of power points of the monster. So for example, if it's a 3-player game and your champion has 14 strength points and the monster is Almas, whose power is 3 times, then 3 players times 3 is 9. Almas has a strength of 9. You have a strength of 14. You therefore defeat the monster. You take the top asset card, and your champion's strength is reduced by those 9 points, leaving you with 5. But what happens if the monster has more strength than my champion? And once again, there are several things you can do. One of them is you can turn to the other champions in the caravan with you and ask for help. Details of how this works are on page 11 of the rulebook. Second thing you can do is, if things are looking desperate and none of the other champions are willing or able to help you, you can call for divine protection. Divine protection means that your god is in fact going to come in on your behalf and kill the monster, and you can take the asset card. But one, you can only use either divine protection or your god's ability once. And secondly, if you call on your god reveals themselves. Therefore, you have to turn over your god card so everybody can see whose god's wishes you're following. So this is kind of a last resort. Whichever of those happens, the outcome is that either the monster is vanquished and you get the asset, or your champion is vanquished and you lose that number of points and you don't get the asset. Again, there are multiple possibilities here and they're all laid out on page 12, but let's say your champion has a strength of 12 and the monster has a strength of 16, then you are down to 0, my friend. And what you have to do is to then sit out the next sacred site so you can heal. You can't be killed, but you can be reduced to nothing. So when the caravan moves on to the next sacred site, you are obliged to sit out and gain the 5 strength points of recovery. You can't take part in any combat. You can't help anybody else out. You are wounded. So after the first player's turn has taken place and they've either sat out or they have fought, the turn moves on to the next player clockwise, and they go through essentially the same process. When everybody has either sat out or fought the monster, and they may have received an asset card in the process, that particular turn is finished, except for one thing. Everybody passes 1 asset card to the player on their left. So once again, this is a chance to get rid of a useless card and hope you get a better one, but equally you have to be careful and choose to pass an asset card that the next player likely doesn't want. At that point, the Camel Shagai is then moved on to the next sacred site, and the process continues all around the 8 sacred sites of the Mongol lands. When you have completed the turn at the 8th of the sites, one other little thing takes place, which is that each player has the chance to discard 1 asset card from their hand and replace it with a card from the top of the asset deck. And at that point, the nomadic phase of the game is over. The Camel Shagai is discarded, and the game moves on to the summer festival at Naadam. Naadam is the high point of the Mongol year, and it is a time of showdowns. It is one of the oldest, if not the oldest, athletic competition and festival in the world, at which the 3 traditional Mongol sports, archery, wrestling, and horse racing, are contested. It's a time of storytelling and trading and meeting up of old friends and probably old enemies as well. It's a time when everything comes together. The game Ulus changes in several ways once we get to Naadam. First of all, if you haven't used your god's ability at this point, it's now too late. On the other hand, now your champion's ability is going to come into play, so it's worth noting exactly what that is and thinking about when you're going to use it. The other thing that changes is that the Shagai are now used in the fashion that they're used in children's games throughout Asia. And in fact, the three traditional sports at Naadam are played as part of our game Ulus using Shagai. Now, instead of being rolled for divination purposes, they're now going to be used sort of like marbles or jacks as games of skill and dexterity. So the first of the games is the horse racing game. And in fact, there is a traditional children's horse race Shagai game, which we've adapted a little bit for the Ulus game. So the goal of the game is to have your champion ride their horse around the Mongol lands in the order in which they were visited during the nomadic phase of the game, and then back to Naadam. In other words, around all 8 of the sacred sites, ending up in the circle in the middle back at Naadam. Player with the fewest asset cards starts. Each of the players takes a Shagai and puts it at the starting point at Naadam, horse side up. So that Shagai is now your horse, and you have to keep track of whose is whose, obviously. And then each player, in turn, rolls 4 Shagai. For each horse Shagai, in other words, each Shagai that ends horse face up, you move your horse Shagai 1 site forward. It turns out that because the Shagai are not uniform, horse is often quite difficult to roll. Believe it or not, it actually takes a certain amount of skill. If you get too frustrated by this, then you can play a different version of the game where you race camels, because the camel side, for whatever reason, is somewhat easier to roll and comes up more often. Again, each of the champions has an ability or a skill that can be used during Naadam, and in the case of the horse racing, Genghis Khan's special ability is horsemanship, so he starts 2 sites ahead of everyone else. But Alun Gua's ability is horse whispering, and at any point during the horse race, she can sing her opponent's horses to sleep, and they all miss 2 turns. So the winner is the champion who gallops around the 8 sacred sites and gets back to Naadam first. And with each of these Naadam games, the winner gets an Eternal Blue Sky card. The Eternal Blue Sky concept is a fascinating and spiritual concept that is explained in the rulebook. And in terms of the game, it's worth 20 points. Whoever wins one of these games puts an Eternal Blue Sky card in front of them next to the game mat. Archery. Here we start really bringing in the manual skills associated with Shagai games in Asia. This is a game in which players are going to flick their Shagai with a thumbnail or a fingernail to try and do so accurately, which is obviously something that takes a certain amount of practice. The archery game consists of 5 rounds, and the goal is to win the most points in all the rounds combined. The player with the most asset cards goes first. What that player does is to place 1 Shagai just on the mat. By the way, you've already cleared away all of the sacred site cards by now. And what you'll see is that the Naadam circle at the center of the game mat really consists of 2 circles, an inner circle and an outer circle. And yes, those are the bullseye. The first player tries to flick their Shagai so that it ends up as close as possible to the circle in the middle of the mat. Knocking away an opponent's Shagai is entirely permitted. So when everybody has flicked 1 Shagai, then any player with a Shigai that is completely within the smaller inner circle earns 10 points. Any player with a Shigai that is completely in the outer circle or straddling the line between the inner and the outer circle earns 4 points. Then everybody takes back their Shigai at the end of that round, and the player who won the previous round goes first, and play continues clockwise. So at the end of 5 rounds, you add up how many points that you have managed to achieve with your accuracy, and whoever has won the most points gets an Eternal Blue Sky card. Gesa's special ability is marksmanship, so he enters the archery contest with a bonus of 4 points already. Sohatani Becky's ability is much more devious and cruel. She can compel one other champion to shoot with their non-dominant hand and with their dominant eye closed for the entire contest. Good luck with that. Wrestling. For this game, all 25 Shigai are just dropped, not from too great a height, into the middle of the mat. If any of them roll all the way off the mat, you just drop them into the middle of the mat again. So the idea is that you get this sort of scattering effect of Shigai all over the mat. The player with the fewest asset cards selects one of the Shigai and tries to flick it, once again using a fingertip or a thumbnail, so as to hit another Shigai of the same kind. So, for example, if there are 2 goat Shigai close together, then that player may decide, oh, I'm going to go for goats, and flick the one goat against the other, in which case they take the one they hit off the mat, they put it in front of them because they've captured that one, and then they look around for another goat to try and hit. As soon as you miss or you hit a Shigai and either yours or the other one go off the mat, or instead of hitting a Shigai with the same face, you hit a different one, your turn is over. There are a whole lot of fairly detailed rules about this that you'll find in the rulebook on pages 14 and 15. At the end, there are probably only 2 Shigai left, and whoever's turn it is can hit the second Shigai regardless of what face it is. But by then, all of the Shigai except one have been captured and taken off the mat, and the player who has hit or captured the most Shigai wins. In the result of a tie, then the 2 highest scoring wrestlers have a tiebreaker round. As Hotalun's ability is wrestling, her player removes 2 of the Shigai and places them in front of them before the game begins, starting with a 2 Shigai advantage. Jangar's ability is parry at the start of the contest after the Shigai have been dropped onto the mat, before anybody's actually done any flicking yet. Jangar's player may tell each opponent which Shigai to aim for. This is the equivalent of playing pool or a snooker. As you would expect, at the end of the wrestling game, you count up who has won the most Shigai, and the winner gets an Eternal Blue Sky card. And at that point, all of the Shigai are removed from the mat, and the Tulsh card is placed in the middle of the mat. The last element of the game Ulus is actually a spiritual and narrative element. Traditional storytellers were very, very important characters in traditional Mongol culture. There still are traditional storytellers, although there are much fewer of them. According to traditional belief, if they tell a tale well, then it can bring health or fertility or a good harvest. It's not just a form of entertainment, it's a spiritual transaction. So what happens here is that, once again, starting with the oldest player, each player in turn is going to petition Tulsh to tell the tale of their epic adventure during the game Ulus. You're going to petition Tulsh by rolling 4 Shigai. If you do a good or propitious roll, and again, all of the details on this are on page 16 of the rulebook, Then Tulsh will tell the tale of your epic quest to the accompaniment of horsehead fiddle. Basically, you will come out of the whole thing looking like a hero in the great tradition of Mongol heroes, and you will gain strength and asset cards, and it will be a wonderful thing. If, on the other hand, your Shagai roll is not good, then things won't go quite so well for you. So again, as I say, all of the details are spelled out in the rulebook on page 16. But for example, if you roll 3 or 4 goats, then Tulsh curses you, your children, and your children's children. Boils break out all over your body, and you run from his ger in pain and shame, the scornful laughter of the other champions stinging your ears. You lose 10 strength points, and you must discard 1 asset card. After that tense and potentially grueling encounter, the game is over, and you're going to add your strength points, plus any points from Eternal Blue Sky cards, plus the value of your asset cards. And the asset cards, as you'll see, have 3 different levels of value, so you add those up. But there is a wrinkle in the game, and this is why it's important to keep the gods' identities secret, because if Lobsagoi is in play and has been keeping secret all this time, I think of Lobsagoi as being kind of like Loki, then Lobsagoi can use any Eternal Blue Sky cards that he has won as weapons. For each Eternal Blue Sky card he holds, he can reduce one opponent's final game tally by those 20 points. So remember, what Lobsagoi is trying to do is to not create a particular vision for the Mongol lands that is stable or noble or worthwhile. He's, like Loki, an agent of chaos. He just wants to mess with everybody else. The way you determine the winner is that everybody adds up their strength points plus asset points plus Eternal Blue Sky. Whoever has the most points is the winner, unless Lobsagoi is in play and no other player has 60 or more points. Lobsagoi wins. There are going to be some players who enjoy playing as Lobsagoi more than anybody else. So that is our game, Ulus Legends of the Nomads. At our site, ulusgame.com, you'll find a lot more information about Mongolian culture, about Mongolian history, about calligraphy, and all sorts of links to learning the Mongolian language and script if you're interested, and of course I hope you are. There's the opportunity to buy Ulus merchandise. We are strongly considering introducing expansion packs because heaven knows there are many more Mongolian champions and demons and gods than we have included in this game. And we would love to hear your recommendations about that. We'd also like to hear any variants that you've come up with. I'm a great believer in improving on games or introducing new rules or new ways of playing. And so please let us know about those. We are planning to add to our range of games that support Mongolian language and script and culture in the near future. So please follow endangeredalphabets.com or to follow the Endangered Alphabets on Facebook or Instagram. You can find out a ton more about other indigenous, minority, endangered, marginalized scripts in the Atlas of Endangered Alphabets, which is at endangeredalphabets.net. Please bear in mind that we are a nonprofit and we survive almost exclusively on donations and Kickstarter campaigns. So we would love it if you could support us going forward into the future as we do our best to give the recognition and encouragement and support and development we can to cultures all over the world whose writing system, whose language, and whose general cultural identity is threatened in one way or another. Thanks again, and stay in touch.